Thank you for tuning in and welcome back to the channel. Today's video is not going to be a build guide, but more of an analysis comparing one class to another, the melee sorceress versus the melee assassin. While the melee source has been very successful, I feel like the melee assassin archetype, while it is very fun and I really like the playstyle, tends to wilt under the pressure of some of the harder zones in Median XL. The core concept of this video is going to be more comparing the dedicated melee sorceress set versus the dedicated assassin melee set in the game. I will compare both offensive and defensive capabilities of these specific sets so you guys can make more of an informed opinion on whether you'd like to attempt to play the melee assassin archetype like I have. This video will be broken down into 3 smaller sections, the first being a direct comparison of the builds, talent trees, and gear between both classes, the second being a small live gameplay demo of the 2 builds in action, and the third being my suggestions on how to bring the melee assassin archetype up to par with the other melee classes in the game. Before we jump into this video, I want to remind you guys that I do stream on Twitch Wednesday and Thursday morning, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and on Sunday evenings, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time as well. I will leave a link in the description of the video below to my Twitch page. You guys can catch me live there if you have any questions on this video or about the builds themselves, okay? Let's go ahead and jump into this video. I will see you guys in game, all right? I'll see you there. Bye-bye. Okay, so here we are on the assassin. We'll be looking at her first. Let's really quickly go over the talent tree before we get into the gear. This build is based off Twin Fang Strike. The reason being is because the melee assassin set is geared toward doing fire and poison damage and a little bit of energy scaling. So this is the best skill for that on the assassin tree outside of any O skills you might get from gear. You're going to put points into Shadow Refuge. I maxed it just to try to get my physical resistance up as high as possible. You're going over into the Martial tree. You're going to be maxing Wave the Spider, Wave the Phoenix, points into Perfect Being until you get up to 50% chance to avoid damage, 1 point into Beacon for the movement speed bonus provided, and then any remaining points into Prismatic Cloak. Going over the items that I will be using to compare the 2 classes, as you can tell, it might look a little weird, but I am just using the 4 pieces. The reason being is because I just want to directly compare the set versus set. Basically, the premise of the set is that as you can read, it says you cast Sacrifice, Crucify, and Reanimate. So basically, as you're attacking, you're doing poison and fire damage, and then you're reanimating these corpses from Sacrifice to give yourself an army of like meat shields. So it's kind of like a pseudo, very pseudo summoner while scaling poison and fire damage. Now, the damage is good with other gear. It's a little misleading because Twin Fang Strike, as you read here, the damage you're seeing on the tooltip is actually just the explosion damage. There is the on-hit element of it, so that is not showing up in your character pane, which kind of sucks. But as you get higher and higher flat damage, any damage from elemental or physical is the on-hit damage. You can't see it, but I promise you the damage is actually very good with this character once you get enough gear. The stat distribution for this is really simple. If I had other gear on, I would be using strength just to use it, and then all other points into dexterity. So back over here on the Sorceress, let's really quickly revisit the talent tree. It's the same talent tree that I have went over before in the Melee Sorceress guide, so if you'd rather not listen to it, you can go ahead and skip to the next section where I'll go over just the gear and looking at it. But just for anyone who hasn't seen that video, I'll leave a link in the description below so you can refer to it later if you'd like. Let's go ahead and go over the talent tree for this character. So it is the Melee Sorceress, so we're going to max out Moonstrike. You're going to put as many points you can into Snow Queen. You're going to max out Warp Armor. You're going to go over to your reward, max out Baneblade, 5 points into Symbol of Esu, and as you can tell, I've put 2 points into Nova Charge. And Snow Queen quite isn't maxed, but with higher gear and the other gear, it will actually hit the sweet 30% max life and full 25,000 defense, and then I've dumped up to 28 base points into Familiar. Going over the stats and the gear that I'll be using on the Sorceress itself, same thing with the Assassin. If I had other gear on, besides the 4 set pieces here, I would be using some points into Strength to use it, and then everything else into Dexterity. Let's go ahead and look at the Sorceress set by itself as well. Looking at the bonuses itself, it gives 10% chance to crushing blow, which works on other monsters besides bosses, so it gives you a good chunky damage. Gives you plus to Spiral Dance, Sacred Armor, and Moon Queen. A flat 4,000 defense, 50 to dexterity, 5% chance to avoid damage, and physical resistance up to 10%. This set is actually really strong because you can get other gear that enhances Spiral Dance. So if you get the Hammer Fist Sacred Uniques, which is actually what I use when this character is fully geared out, you get a really strong Spiral Dance, and in the guide I suggested using that as well over anything else. So I have socketed in this gear Dexterity runes and then Jaw runes into the weapon just for some more damage. So breaking down the classes, what you're seeing here is the values that I have for both classes, given full combat buffs, just the set items, the same charms on each character, and the skill tree provided that I went over a little bit earlier in the video. So looking at the Sorceress side, we have about 12,000 life, 25% chance to avoid damage, 42% chance to block, 480,000 defense, 9% life leech, 451 life on hit, 10% to all elemental absorb, and 20% physical resistance. Looking at the assassin side, we have 5.7 thousand life, 50% chance to avoid damage, 0% chance to block, 8,000 defense, 8% life leech, 390 life on hit, 5% all elemental absorb, and 50% physical resistance. The difference here, you might notice, is fairly large, favoring the Sorceress. It's actually a little ridiculous to see just how well the Sorceress class synergizes with the dedicated melee Sorceress set, and how little the dedicated assassin melee set synergizes. So just looking at this, you can tell that you're gonna have a really rough time surviving on the assassin versus the Sorceress. But before we give a final verdict, let's go ahead and jump over to some live gameplay demos of each class, given that they're going to be in Dagger'd, to give a visual representation of just the combat effectiveness of the class plus the set going forward, okay? So given the footage that you guys just saw, the Sorceress was able to survive roughly about 40 to 45 seconds inside Dagger'd, eventually succumbing to a large swarm of monsters and taking a couple barrel hits. And the Assassin unfortunately succumbed to a much smaller pack of monsters in about 17 seconds. I know it's a small sample size of combat effectiveness of the character, but comparing the two footage samples that I provided, you can tell that the Sorceress was in the middle of a fairly large pack as soon as I entered into the main part of the Abbey and didn't die, while the Assassin eventually died to maybe 3 or 4 melee hits outside to far less monsters. So I feel like it's a fairly accurate representation of just the difference in defensive capabilities of the classes, given that the Sorceress was able to survive longer and through more monsters, and the Assassin died much quicker to far less monsters on screen. I want to address something before diving deep into this section. This is not an attempt to be combative with the developers of the game. I understand they are a very small team and they're doing their absolute best to keep the game as balanced and keep each class well represented in the current landscape of the game, so I must commend them for that. With that out of the way, why don't we go ahead and jump into my first supposed fix for the class, and that is simply just changing the offhand to a shield. While the assassin does have an inherent chance to avoid damage well above 50%, the problem is it's basically her only defensive layer, and just because there's so many monsters attacking you at once, it doesn't really matter how much percentage you have. Eventually it's going to fail and you're going to take a tremendous amount of damage, so being able to add another defensive layer on top of that will help tremendously, I believe. The graphic you're seeing on screen is the supposed fix of the shield that I would suggest changing the Kestis offhand to. Witch Hunter's Bastion is the name that I went with, and it's the Bladed Shield Sacred Base, base block chance of 4%. I kept the similar stats of the Kestis. The original weapon gave fire damage, summoned minion life, plus to energy, fire resistance, and minus to requirements. I kept those to keep the flavor of the offhand similar to the original, but just given that it goes from a weapon to a shield, we need to change a couple of the stats. The two that I decided to change it to was giving it a +1 base block chance and a large 5,000 plus bonus to defense on the flat side of things. I feel like giving it +2 would be a little bit too easy to scale up to max block, so you'd still have to work for it. And the fact that assassins don't really get a lot of flat defense from any of their gear, I feel giving this a large chunk of flat defense, which you could scale up through mystic orbs, I feel would be a good bonus to the overall defensive capabilities of the assassin. Onto the second fix for the class is going to be a combo of two talents that I've modified, which I feel will synergize very well together, given the current state of the assassin. What you're seeing here is Perfect Being. If anyone is familiar with assassin, it just gives you the chance to avoid damage in the game currently. The modification that I made to it was giving you +25 to life per base level. I feel like the small amount of flat life gained from this is going to synergize well with any max percent life that you may get on gear, and the number that you're seeing is based on a level 130 assassin, so at level 130 you're only getting +500 to life, but that does scale with percent to life that you can get through gear, or the talent fix that you will see here in just a minute after this one. So let's go ahead and go into the second one, where you'll see why I changed the other one in accordance with this one as well. The second half of the combo talent that I would suggest changing is actually modifying Prismatic Cloak. The way that I've modified it, I feel, is conservative and allows not only a little bit of extra survivability in the early game when you unlock it, but also adds some late game life scalability. So if you read the way that I modified it, normally you just get the physical and magical damage reduced. But if you read down on the bottom, the +1 to vitality per character level and the +1% to maximum life per base level. I feel this would give you just enough extra life to maybe hit 9 to 10,000 life with some very well optimized assassin gear, given the fact that I've been able to get a melee sorceress up to 15,000 with barely any investment. I feel like getting around 10,000 is a good baseline level that all characters should be able to obtain, and I feel this would be a very easy and quick way to implement some extra survivability into the class going forward. Before closing out this video, I do want to address something really fast. I do understand that the community has agreed upon a viable assassin melee spec, which is basically taking all of the trap nodes, getting down to artifice mastery for the dual wield block chance, and then scaling Noctul. I don't feel like that's a very true representation of what a melee assassin is, considering the melee set is so poor at defenses. I understand that if they implement something similar to a talent tree change like I have suggested, it would just make that talent tree and spec even better, and I don't believe he's probably going to be giving us Artifice Mastery anytime soon outside of that tree, so take that with a grain of salt. If you've made it this far, I do want to thank you personally. I appreciate you guys watching this video. If you liked the video, go ahead and like, comment, subscribe. I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good night. Bye-bye.